Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News and plenty to dive into today after the free practice sessions at the Australian Grand Prix. Another solid day for Ferrari and Red Bull, no doubt, but the gap between them and Mercedes seems to only be growing. Lewis Hamilton very frustrated that whatever they seem to do to the car doesn't seem to be closing the gap one bit. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed for doing that one. Nice to see this friendship back in business again this weekend. We'll see how competitive the Alfa is with the Mercedes, because more than likely Mercedes are going to be top, if not further back in the midfield, because not been a particularly good Friday for them. FP1 gets underway immediately. It's it's these two back at it again. Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen on track. They end the day P1, P2 in terms of fastest times. We'll talk about how FP1 went, how FP2 went, because very interesting stories of the day, to be honest, especially where the Mercedes cars are. In fairness, they had a pretty shocking time in practice, they also in qualifying, right, especially Hamilton, but last time out in Jeddah, but they managed to turn it around in the race and actually had a car that was, competitive, could get top 5, probably would have been P5, P6 if Hamilton didn't have such a shocking qualifying, so maybe they'll still turn it around FP3 for qualifying in the race, but yeah, not looking good for the Mercs so far. Couple of red flags in the first session. Bit of Perez's car just goes off onto the racing line. They have to deal with that one. Get back on track though. Some drivers having problems keeping the car on the track, I think especially at turn 3 with the new kind of gravel runoff area they have there. Well, the drivers were doing their best to push it to the absolute limit that they could do without the wall there anymore, and therefore a few of them were finding their way onto the gravel. And this also, right, Sebastian Vettel, this is the meme of the day, no doubt about it. Fireman said he's back in business, baby. You can't make this stuff up. Basically, the engine gives out. And honestly, we've seen plenty of engine and power unit failures so far this season. Of course, the Bahrain Grand Prix, it was, for the Red Bulls, wasn't necessarily a power unit failure, it was a fuel issue. But, since then, the Alfa Tauri guys have been riddled with issues. Of course, now the Aston Martin having problems. We saw the Alpine of Fernando Alonso in Jeddah had an issue, like Riccardo's car as well, Bottas's car. As expected, I guess, with new regulations, you're going to have some sort of reliability issues. But now they're affecting Aston Martin, a car that already seems to be pretty uncompetitive, right? So you're at least hoping if your car's uncompetitive, you'll have some decent reliability to maybe pick up some points if you have a decent race of other cars that will fall out of there. But maybe not going to be the case, because Sebastian Vettel, they have to put a whole new power unit in his car. He misses FP2 as a result. Not a great return really for him after, missing the first couple of races. And this was honestly just unbelievable, right? With, Vettel, pretty much it was at the end, right? He needed to find a way to get back to the pit lane. And then one of the marshals there was like, I think maybe Vettel asked for it or something. It was like, can I just borrow your scooter to get back? And it basically did like a lap of honor at the end of this. It was honestly unbelievable scenes. This has 70,000 odd likes on Twitter. It's just hilarious stuff, to be honest. Look at this guy. And he's holding up 5 fingers for the 5,000 euros he gets fined for doing this. I guess there's a rule against a scooter on track or something. I don't know. There was quite a lot of talk about that, actually. The fact that, they're fining Vettel for this. They're not allowing the drivers to have jewelry or whatever. But, missiles in Saudi Arabia, it's perfectly fine. No investigation necessary. And Uber Eats on the back of Seb's car, he's in the MotoGP. This as well was another good one. There were many good ones going on, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, Seb leading up the MotoGP. Here comes Sebastian Vettel around the outside. And that's 5,000 euros he gets fined at the end of the day. So pretty incredible. This was FP1 classification though. So Carlos Sainz P1 with a 1:19.8. The times got much quicker as the day went on, but of course on the soft tyre. I believe Bottas said yesterday that the soft tyre is pretty much only going to be good for qualifying. He doesn't expect to see it in the race. Guess we'll see. But here I think Verstappen was having some issues, and so same with Perez in terms of the handling of the Red Bull in the first session or so. FP2 got much better for them. They tweaked some things around. Hamilton was P7, Russell P12, and only actually got worse for the Mercedes as the day continued. We go into FP2. Riccardo actually, especially in FP2, they had some pretty good runs, the McLaren, to be honest. Pretty sure they were ahead of the Mercedes, which, so maybe a good sign if things get chaotic and, somehow Leclerc and Verstappen take each other out and then the other guys take each other out. Who knows? The Honey Badger comes through for the home victory. I guess, he'll be hoping about that one. But at least if the car's somewhat competitive, it could make for a more interesting weekend, to be honest. Because the McLaren so far, it looked actually much better in Jeddah than it did in Bahrain. But, maybe this race it's going to get better and better, to be honest. Was plenty of issues being noted by the students as well, plenty of incidents of cars blocking each other off. I think Hamilton and Stroll get into a bit of a kerfuffle. There was a Russell got frustrated with a couple of the Red Bulls for doing a similar thing. I think Tsunoda actually got basically a reprimand for, I think his second reprimand of the season already for a kind of similar issue. So plenty of that going on, as you might well expect. Hamilton has a big run wide right here into the gravel, as we just discussed. So yeah, many drivers struggling, or at least, finding the limits, let's just say, of this new track is much quicker than the previous one, with the disappearance, or at least the moving of turn 9 and 10, the straightening out of that back curve. There was one red flag right at the end of the session, but Lance Stroll's car just decides to fall off. But that's pretty much it for the session. Alonso, honestly, with kind of the star performance of the session. Both Alpines looked very strong. Pretty sure he went P1 for a time, or at least P2. And ocon right behind him. Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, Alonso Alonso, Perez, Ocon, Bottas, Norris and Riccardo. So both McLarens in the top 10. Gasly kind of splitting the two McLarens. But yeah, both Mercedes, George Russell in P11, Lewis Hamilton in P13, with very similar times, I guess, to what they did, maybe slightly faster than what they did in FP1. But Leclerc's up here with a 1:18.9. Verstappen was right behind him. I kind of watched, Karun break down the onboards between both the cars. Seems like the Red Bull is gaining a bit on the straights, not dramatically so on the straights, but I'm pretty sure the top speeds have been quite significantly faster for the Red Bulls than they have for the Ferrari. But the Ferrari was just handling much better in the third sector from what Verstappen was able to do. So definitely some sloppy laps from Verstappen, but still he's got about 2.5 tenths to make up on Leclerc. Sainz was great in FP1, but I couldn't quite put it together the same. But still goes P3, Alonso P4, Perez P5. So sets up a very exciting weekend indeed. Both Mercedes were struggling though. And that's the thing, we saw the discussion yesterday, right? We talked about it, that Mercedes aren't actually going to be bringing any upgrades for this weekend. We expected them to bring this kind of lower downforce rear wing to compensate for, well, obviously they have to raise his ride height to deal with the porpoising, and therefore they thought, okay, maybe we'll bring in this lower downforce one. They seem to have realized maybe it's not actually worth it, just because the problem is so immense that it kind of using this to deal with the issue isn't really tackling the core issue and the root of their problem. So they've actually decided to go against that idea. But of course they had a pretty torrid session once again, right? P11, P13 at the end of FP2, not where they want to be, not where they need to be as the weekend progresses. And Hamilton seemed somewhat despondent maybe, I don't know, sometimes he's like this in interviews, but he seemed rather frustrated. That he even said he's pretty frustrated that it doesn't seem to matter what they do all that much. The car doesn't seem to get all that much quicker. They're trying things out, they're trying to find the gap and bridge the gap to the leaders, but he reckoned that even when he has a good decent lap and he feels like he hit the corners well, hit the apexes, all this type of stuff, still over a second down on the fastest lap of the session, right? I'm pretty sure we saw it was in FP1 when Hamilton put in a 1:21 dead, and he reckoned that was pretty good. I think that might have been enough for P7, but then you've still got Carlos Sainz at the top of the times with a 1:19.8, I think it was. So yeah, Hamilton was pretty frustrated. Not sure if I can get away with playing this without the copyright claim, but I'll give it a go.
No, it's just nothing you change on the car makes a difference at the moment. So that's the difficult thing, you get in very optimistic and then you make changes and then it doesn't seem to be wanting to improve. And so and we made some changes going into P2. The P1 was better and P2 ended up being a bit harder for me. So I don't know, it's just a tricky car. There's just not a lot we can do. This is the way it is, and so we just have to drive with it. So that's just the frustrating thing, because you're trying to push, you're trying to catch, and even when you do a decent lap, it's 1.2 seconds down. So it's it's just difficult.
So what is being reported as coming out of the Mercedes camp right now is that, of course, Hamilton's frustrated, right? The fact that the car doesn't seem to want to respond. Whatever they try, he reckoned in FP2 they tried a different setup, wasn't quite as good as FP1. So they're trying things out. They're doing their best to try and do their best with the current car that they actually have and the package that they can potentially form. But it's not going to be good enough at all unless some significant either aero or potentially mechanical upgrades come through. Because it must be said, the Ferrari this session was also showing signs of porpoising. I imagine they're running a much kind of lower ride height than the Mercedes are right now. So probably if the Mercedes tried to run a similar low, kind of ride height, they'd also probably be experiencing even worse porpoising. But the Ferrari was certainly dealing with it, right? And I guess the drivers have decided, okay, well, we'll suck it up. It's probably the quickest way for the car to be right now. And in fairness, if Ferrari can kind of get on top of those issues even more, then, well, their car might be even quicker, I guess, in theory, even though Red Bull have some weight-saving upgrades coming through as well. So lots really to discuss and to see what happens going forwards. But it's possible Mercedes are looking at the fact that Ferrari is still kind of bouncing around a bit and thinking, well, we're obviously bouncing around quite significantly. Maybe it's not the porpoising issue which is causing our car to be so slow, right? I think George Russell says if they stop the porpoising, they'll fix 99% of their problems. But that might actually not be the case, just because the Ferrari is still doing it and topping the timesheet in both practices. And that apparently also these remarks were made. The Ferrari bounces wildly on the straights, but they don't seem to mind. Red Bull drives practically and calmly and deeply, and is also pretty fast with it as well. So you do have to wonder whether the Mercedes issue is an aerodynamic issue in terms of the porpoising and stuff like this they need to fix with a new floor or whatever, or whether it's more of a suspension based issue, or who knows, and whether it's a mechanical issue where they need to actually get on top of that. So maybe they're not really sure what exactly the problem is or where they need to improve, and therefore they've just kind of waived these upgrades and said, look, there's no point in further developing a car until the main problem is understood and solved. And the issue is that on every single different track it behaves differently, so it's very difficult to say what upgrades you should bring in, what new floor they want to bring in for Imola, because if it maybe works for Jeddah or it works for Bahrain or it works for Australia, might not work for other tracks, right? So it does create an awful lot of complication for them. I'm sure there's plenty of late nights in kind of Brackley and stuff like this. Mercedes did come out and say, we already have some ideas of which direction we can go with this setup. We'll do more work overnight in Brackley to understand those changes better. So I imagine there's no team right now putting in more hours than the Mercedes guys. That's the thing in general with Ferrari, Red Bull. They're probably relatively confident and comfortable where their car is, but at Mercedes, most certainly not. So they're probably the team putting in the most hours, putting in the most work. So, you would think they'd get back up there, but you could argue the only reason people are thinking they'll get back to the top is just because they are Mercedes, right? And they've won the Constructors' Championship for the last 8 years. If they had another brand name effectively and they weren't called Mercedes, then maybe that expectation would not be there, right? I think we're going to have to give it at least another couple of races to just see if Mercedes are going to be able to create a competitive package this year. But I think every race that goes by, in fairness though, it's not like people really expected with bringing basically the same car they've had since the start of the year to this race here in Australia, them to get much quicker. But if anything, they're losing more time now than they were before. So they realise what the benchmark is. They, I guess, understand what is wrong, but still actually to come up with a solution is going to be far from easy. Toto Wolff has described that the Red Bull he believes are the benchmark if it loses weight. I believe they said that from Imola, they're going to try and bring in some weight-saving upgrades, save a few kilos. Like I think maybe they said 8 kilos or something, which is quite significant. And the Ferrari, basically, they also say they might have some engine mode in the tank, so they can potentially turn that up. So both of those cars probably have room to go quicker, and the Mercedes are going to get on top of things as well, right? Because if they have a second to make up on the Ferrari, then let's say they make up that second. By the time they've made up that second, the Ferrari and the Red Bull are going to be another 2, 3, 4 tenths faster, you could argue, based on the upgrades they're bringing in, if Mercedes can even bridge that gap, right? So definitely many questions for those guys to answer. But yes, Toto Wolff reckons right now both Red Bull and Ferrari are ahead of us. It'll be difficult to overtake them. We know where the bar is. If Red Bull can save some weight, they are the benchmark for us, says Toto Wolff. We shall see how it goes in the coming days. Of course, tomorrow, very early in Europe, it's FP3, and then it's qualifying just after that. We're expecting a rather similar weekend at the top, but behind the Red Bulls and the Ferraris, things get very spicy because will we have a similar practice session or similar qualifying session to what Mercedes had to suffer through last time with Hamilton going out in Q1? Will the Alpines be up there? Will the Haas's be up there? The McLarens might be back to form. Definitely very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.